The galaxy had known peace for eons. The ancient civilizations that dominated the stars were complacent, their technology far surpassing any known threat. There were whispered legends of a race that had once threatened the entire galactic order, but they were dismissed as myths. The races of the galaxy had long since moved beyond such concerns, with diplomacy, trade, and exploration forming the backbone of their interstellar relations. Then, without warning, the first strike came. The Nadaran Empire, an advanced and powerful species known for their psionic abilities and mastery over gravitational forces, launched a sudden and devastating invasion of the galaxy's core. Their fleet, unmatched in size and power, tore through the defensive lines of the Galactic Council without resistance. The Nadarans' weapons were devastating, plasma weapons that could vaporize entire moons in an instant, and gravity fields that could crush ships as if they were made of paper. The established powers of the galaxy, proud of their strength and ancient traditions, were caught off guard. The Nadarans swept through star systems like a tidal wave, reducing planets to ruins and enslaving entire populations. The once great cities of the galaxy were nothing more than ash and rubble in the wake of their assault. The Galactic Council, a coalition of the most powerful races, convened in an emergency session. But it was too late. Even the combined forces of their fleets, the best trained and most technologically advanced soldiers, stood no chance against the relentless onslaught. Every resistance effort was crushed, every counterattack thwarted. The Nadarans' sheer ferocity and overwhelming power made victory seem impossible. At the edge of the galaxy, a young human fleet commander, Admiral Alara Donovan, watched the destruction unfold. She was a tactical genius, known for her ability to outthink any opponent. But even she was beginning to lose hope. Humanity, though numerous and resilient, was still a young race in galactic terms, small, untested, and without the overwhelming military superiority of their older counterparts. But the humans had something that the Nadarans could never understand: unity. In the darkest hours, when it seemed like all hope was lost, something remarkable happened. Across the shattered worlds, from the depths of space stations to the struggling human colonies on distant planets, a strange wave of solidarity began to emerge. Resistance movements sprung up everywhere, not just from humanity, but from the other races as well. Even those who had once considered humans insignificant began to join the fight. The Galactic Council, now a fractured entity, turned to the humans for leadership. Admiral Donovan, who had lost contact with the Council for weeks, received a desperate transmission. The last remaining Council representatives, isolated in a hidden station far from the front lines, begged her to rally the troops. But the humans knew that what had happened wasn't simply a battle of military strength, it was a war of survival. The Nadarans, powerful as they were, couldn't fathom the power of a unified species willing to fight for everything. "You don't conquer us," Donovan said as she addressed her fleet. "You force us to unite. We are humanity, and we fight together." Her words sparked a flame that would burn across the galaxy. Humanity's secret weapon was not their technology, nor their military strength. It was their ability to come together as one. Despite being vastly outmatched, humanity had something no other species could ever replicate: an unshakable bond of unity. This unbreakable force, combined with their relentless determination, gave them the strength to survive when all seemed lost. As the last of the Nadaran forces prepared to make their final push toward Earth, Admiral Donovan gave the order to strike back. The humans' fleets, once fragmented and inexperienced, now moved with precision and purpose. Their resistance would not be defined by overwhelming firepower, but by the sheer will of the people working together. Every human, no matter their background or station, was involved in the war effort. Families worked side by side in shipyards, while scientists and engineers developed new weapons at a breakneck pace. Entire colonies transformed into war factories. The first battle of the counteroffensive took place near the shattered world of Narthal, a critical Nadaran stronghold. Human forces had formed alliances with the surviving fleets of other races, pooling their resources and strategies to face the Nadaran juggernaut. The Nadarans were confident, believing that the humans' resistance was a mere nuisance. But they had underestimated one thing: unity. As the battle unfolded, the Nadarans found themselves facing a new type of warfare, one where every human fleet, every species, fought as a single entity. The Naderans' overwhelming technological advantage began to falter in the face of coordinated tactics and sheer resolve. The humans weren't simply defending, they were pushing back. For the first time in the war, the Naderans hesitated. Their forces were still superior, but they couldn't shake the feeling that they were up against something far more dangerous than they had anticipated, a force they couldn't comprehend. And that was only the beginning. The Naderans had always prided themselves on their superiority. Their psionic abilities, honed over millennia, made them unrivaled in telepathy, telekinesis, and the manipulation of gravitational fields. Their vast empire had conquered worlds without ever encountering a worthy adversary. But now, in the face of humanity's unexpected resistance, something had shifted. The Naderans had never fought an enemy that fought not only with technology, but with a singular force of will, a unity that connected them in ways the Naderans could not fathom. As the battle near Narthal continued, the Naderan High Command began to take notice of the human resolve. Commander Thraxus, the Naderan leader of the invasion, paced back and forth in his command center. His vast fleet had suffered minor losses, but nothing that would jeopardize their ultimate victory. Yet, there was an undercurrent of doubt among his officers, an unease that couldn't be explained by their superior firepower alone. Why do they keep coming? Thraxus muttered, his voice low, filled with frustration. How can they resist? We are invincible. A voice, cold and calculating, echoed from the shadows behind him. It is not their technology, Commander. It is something else. The voice belonged to Vairi, the Naderan's chief strategist, known for her ability to predict the enemy's every move. She had been studying the humans for months, trying to understand what made them so unpredictable, so difficult to crush. Explain, Thraxus demanded. Vairi stepped forward, her gaze fixed on the holographic battlefield before them. They are not fighting with the usual tactics. They are not relying on superior firepower or weapons. They are fighting with something else. It is an intangible force, a force that binds them together. We cannot control it, cannot predict it. It is a form of unity that we have never encountered before. Thraxus scoffed. Unity? We have crushed entire civilizations that were unified. What makes them different? Vairi paused, her expression unreadable. These humans, they do not fight for themselves. They fight for each other, for their homes, their families, their future. They are not driven by fear or greed. They fight for something deeper, something we cannot comprehend. And it is this unity that gives them the strength to continue. Thraxus' eyes narrowed. What should we do, then? We need to break their unity, Vairi replied, her voice steely with determination. If we can sow division among them, make them turn on each other, we will destroy their will to resist. But if we fail to do that, they will become a true threat, one we will never defeat. Back on the human side, Admiral Alara Donovan was well aware of the Naderans' shift in strategy. The recent victories had been hard fought, and she knew that the Naderans would soon adapt. Their psionic powers, which had been used mainly for reconnaissance and communication, would likely be turned against the humans in ways they had never faced before. But it was not just the threat of psionics that kept her up at night. It was the realization that the humans' unity, their strength as a species, was both their greatest asset and their most fragile point. The Naderans had already begun to manipulate the battlefield, launching covert strikes against key supply lines and communications networks. Their agents, skilled in the art of infiltration, had started spreading rumors of betrayal and distrust among the human ranks. Sabotage missions were carried out on human-held worlds, leaving the colonies in disarray. Admiral Donovan received reports of strange anomalies in the communications channels between human fleets. Messages were garbled, orders lost in transit, and entire divisions reported as missing. There were whispers of mutiny and cowardice. And among the survivors of the earlier battles, there was talk of doubt creeping in, perhaps the Naderans were unbeatable after all. Are they succeeding in breaking us? Donovan wondered aloud as she stared at the holographic map of human forces. Can they truly divide us? She was interrupted by the voice of her trusted lieutenant, Captain Marcus Hayes. "Ma'am, we've intercepted some of their communications. They're trying to spread division. But we've also received word from several resistance cells that they see through the Nadaran deception. We're not alone in this fight. Not by a long shot." Donovan looked up at him, her brow furrowed. "It's not enough. If we can't root out the seeds of doubt now, it will spread like a disease. We need to act fast." And so, Donovan decided to take the fight to the heart of the problem. She would not wait for the Nadarans to break them from the inside. Instead, she would send a clear message to her people, and to the galaxy, that the unity of humanity was unshakable. She ordered a series of daring missions to infiltrate Nadaran strongholds, with one goal in mind: to sabotage their psionic network and turn their own weapon against them. The humans' counterattack was swift and calculated. Small, elite teams of soldiers and engineers, drawn from all walks of life, stormed the Nadaran outposts, planting disruptors in their communications hubs and shattering their psionic networks. These human teams were not just soldiers, they were everyday people, families, teachers, farmers, and engineers, working together as one to protect their home. The Nadarans' once impenetrable psionic shield began to flicker, then crack, as their systems were overwhelmed by the human onslaught. It was clear now: humanity was not going to break. They would not fall into the trap of division and distrust. As the Nadaran forces scrambled to regroup, they realized the terrible truth: the true power of humanity was not in their weapons, their technology, or even their bravery. It was in their unity, their ability to come together in the face of unimaginable odds. And it was that unity that would ultimately be the key to their victory. As the humans' unity continued to resist the Nadaran manipulations, Admiral Alara Donovan knew they could not afford to rest on their laurels. The Nadarans were not an enemy that could be underestimated for long. Despite the initial setbacks, the invaders were relentless, adapting their strategies and launching increasingly sophisticated attacks on human strongholds. The Nadaran psionic powers had been severely disrupted by the humans' covert operations, but their psionic abilities were far from neutralized. The Nadaran still controlled vast swathes of the galaxy, and the war had become a deadly game of cat and mouse. For every victory, there was a devastating counterstrike, and the human resistance had begun to feel the pressure. The human fleets, now united and well-coordinated, were launching attacks across the galaxy. The Nadarans' vast empire stretched across hundreds of systems, and their imperial capital, Narthal, remained the jewel of their civilization. The planet's surface was encased in a network of energy shields, protected by hundreds of warships and an impenetrable defense grid. Yet Admiral Donovan, through the newly formed Human Alliance, had devised a daring plan to infiltrate the heart of the Nadaran Empire. "Every victory brings us closer to their core," Donovan said, pacing in her war room. Her eyes were sharp, calculating. "The Nadarans know we're coming. And they'll use every trick in the book to stop us. But we're not backing down." The human fleet had been pushed to its limits, the toll of months of fighting weighing heavily on every officer and soldier. The war had claimed many lives, and some of the resistance factions that had once been enthusiastic had begun to show signs of exhaustion. The whispers of doubt, though muted, still simmered in the ranks. The resistance had won battles, but they had lost ground too, and it was becoming harder and harder to keep morale up. Yet, even in the face of hardship, Donovan found solace in the unity of her people. Each day, the human resolve grew stronger. People from every world, no matter their background, were coming together for one singular purpose: to protect humanity's future. It wasn't just about survival anymore, it was about proving to the Nadarans, and to the galaxy, that humanity would never be subjugated. Meanwhile, the Nadarans were preparing for their final strike. With their psionics still working at peak levels, they had begun to isolate human fleet groups, cutting them off from one another with sophisticated psychic barriers. A vast armada, led by Commander Thraxus, was being assembled for a devastating assault that would wipe out the human resistance once and for all. The Nadarans had one final weapon in their arsenal, the Dread Wave, a weapon that could destabilize entire star systems and erase all life in its wake. If they deployed it, the human fleets would be reduced to nothing in an instant. Donovan knew the attack was imminent, and the stakes had never been higher. With her fleet scattered and their resources stretched thin, she made a desperate call for reinforcements. It was then that an unexpected ally made contact. "Admiral Donovan," the transmission began, crackling with static, "this is Captain Tylus of the Larku Resistance. We've been monitoring the Nadaran fleet movements. We have a plan that might give you a fighting chance." Tylus, a former Nadaran defect, was once a high-ranking officer in the Nadaran military. His knowledge of their tactics was invaluable. He'd escaped their grasp months ago, fleeing after witnessing the Nadarans' brutality firsthand. His forces, though small, had been building up along the fringes of Nadaran-controlled space. "What do you propose?" Donovan asked. "Your fleet can't win by sheer force. But what if you strike at their weaknesses? We have intel on the Dread Wave, the Nadarans' ultimate weapon. It's anchored to their flagship, the Inferna. We know its location, and we know that if we can infiltrate it, we can disable their weapon." It was the break Donovan had been waiting for. The Inferna was a colossal vessel, capable of incalculating destruction. But if they could take it down, the Nadaran war machine would collapse. The decision was made. The Human Alliance, now joined by defectors, resistance movements, and even a few sympathetic galactic races, would launch a high-stakes mission to infiltrate the Inferna. Time was running out, and the Dread Wave could be deployed at any moment. Donovan's forces split into two divisions. One would continue to hold off Nadaran forces in a series of distracting battles, hoping to keep the enemy distracted long enough for the second division to carry out the infiltration of the Inferna. The mission was perilous. Only a few ships would get through the Nadaran defenses, and if the operation failed, it would mean certain death for the human fleet. The day of the assault arrived. The battle began in the star system surrounding the Inferna, with human ships launching feigned attacks and spreading chaos. While Thraxus's forces focused on defeating this decoy, a small covert fleet led by Donovan herself approached the Inferna. They were joined by a team of special operatives, including Tylus, who had spent months studying the ship's defenses. As they entered the Nadaran stronghold's inner perimeter, they faced unexpected challenges: shifting gravity wells, electromagnetic disruptions, and psionic traps designed to distort reality itself. The humans were not prepared for the intensity of the Nadarans' mental attacks. Crew members began to falter under the pressure, but they kept fighting. They pressed on, knowing what was at stake. The breaking point came when they finally reached the heart of the Inferna, the Dreadwave generator itself, and the Nadaran defenses began to crumble under the weight of human determination. But even in their victory, the cost was steep, lives were lost, and the price of resistance had never been clearer. With the Dreadwave deactivated, Admiral Donovan and her crew made a hasty retreat, leaving the Inferna in chaos. For a moment, the galaxy seemed to hold its breath. But as the Nadaran's flagship exploded in the distance, the humans knew that they had struck a blow that would echo across the galaxy. And they had not only survived, they had shown the Nadarans the true meaning of unity. The explosion of the Inferna sent shockwaves across the galaxy, a resounding signal that the Nadaran Empire had finally met its match. The Dread Wave, once the weapon that could annihilate entire star systems, was disabled. Its power neutralized, the once unassailable Nadaran flagship was reduced to a smoldering wreck, and with it, the Nadarans' hope of crushing humanity in one fell swoop. But victory came at a steep cost. Admiral Alara Donovan and her fleet returned to their makeshift command center, battered and weary. The daring infiltration mission had been a success, but the price of that success was a heavy one. Several human ships were lost in the raid, and countless brave soldiers had perished in the process. Yet as the surviving human forces regrouped, a sense of unyielding resolve took root. The tide of the war had turned. "The Nadarans are reeling," Donovan reported to her crew. "But make no mistake, they will retaliate. We've exposed their vulnerability, and they won't take this lightly. Now, more than ever, we need to stick together." The Human Alliance, now buoyed by the success of the mission, began to regroup, rebuild, and reinforce their fleets. It was time to take the fight to the Nadarans, full force. Meanwhile, far from the battlefront, Natoran High Command was in disarray. Commander Thraxus had been confident that the Inferno would be humanity's downfall. The unexpected failure of the Dreadwave had thrown his strategy into chaos, and his once imposing fleet was now scattered and on the defensive. How could this happen? Thraxus growled, pacing furiously across the command deck of his flagship, the Zephyron. They infiltrated the Inferno and destroyed our Dreadwave. Our strongest weapon, gone. Vairi stood silently, her eyes narrowed. The humans are unlike anything we've ever encountered. They are more than just a nuisance, they are a force united in purpose. We underestimated them. Thraxus clenched his fists. Then we will crush them before they grow stronger. Their unity is their strength, but it is also their weakness. If we break their resolve, if we turn their allies against them, we can destroy their will to fight. We can defeat them. Vairi gave him a sharp glance. We will have to move quickly. If the humans gain too much ground, their unity will become a true weapon. Their resistance will only grow stronger. With a renewed sense of urgency, the Natarans rallied what forces they had left. They were not prepared to fight an enemy that could adapt so quickly, nor one that had such an unbreakable will. But the Natarans were desperate, and when desperation fueled strategy, the most ruthless and cunning moves were often made. At the same time, the human alliance was not content with merely disabling the Dreadwave. With the Nataran fleet fractured and their leadership uncertain, the time had come for humanity to strike directly at the heart of the Nataran Empire. Donovan's next move was bold, a full-scale offensive to liberate the Nataran-occupied planets, retake human colonies, and dismantle their war machine once and for all. Every species in the Alliance was called to arms, and the once fragmented fleets now moved as a unified force, stronger than ever before. The humans and their allies made calculated strikes at key Nataran strongholds, cutting off supply lines, destroying manufacturing facilities, and reclaiming once-occupied worlds. The tide of the war had truly begun to turn. Each victory fed the fire of hope, and with each retaken world, the realization began to dawn on the galaxy: humanity was no longer the underdog. Back in the human heartlands, on Earth, a new wave of solidarity began to ripple through the population. People who had never imagined themselves in combat were volunteering to defend their planet. Governments shifted, pooling resources and knowledge to develop new, innovative weapons. Humanity, ever resourceful, was fighting not just with their military might, but with every aspect of their civilization. Civilians became soldiers, engineers became strategists, and families became the foundation of a worldwide effort to reclaim what was lost. The Alliance's most significant victory came when they liberated the industrial planet of Typha 5, a key resource world that had been under Nataran occupation for over a decade. Its factories had been repurposed for the Natarans' war effort, and its workers had been enslaved, forced to toil endlessly for their captors. When the humans arrived, the planet erupted in celebration. Its citizens, once subdued and oppressed, joined the fight against their former masters. It was an unprecedented moment of unity, as even the enslaved had become liberators. But this victory would not go unnoticed. The Natarans' retaliation came swiftly. They unleashed a devastating counteroffensive, hitting the Alliance hard and fast, targeting strategic positions and planetary defense systems. It was a brutal reminder that the Natarans were not a foe to be underestimated. Yet, despite the Nataran onslaught, the humans and their allies fought back with an intensity born from desperation, from the belief that if they lost now, everything they had fought for would be lost forever. Admiral Donovan stood at the front of the human fleet, her face grim. The enemy had thrown everything they had left into this attack. Their ships, massive and relentless, bore down on the human defenses, and for a moment, it seemed as though the humans might be overwhelmed. But there was something in the air, something that couldn't be quantified by tactics or technology. It was the collective will of every human and every ally, a unifying force that refused to bend. "We are the resistance," Donovan said into her comms, her voice filled with iron resolve. "We are not just fighting for our survival. We are fighting for the future. And we will not be broken." The battle for Typha 5 became the rallying cry for the galaxy. The Naderans' attempt to reassert their dominance was met with a ferocity they had never expected from humanity. The humans didn't just fight, they pushed back. Every strike they made, every piece of Nadaran technology they destroyed, was a testament to their refusal to yield. The tide of the war was shifting permanently. The Naderans, though powerful, were losing their grip on the galaxy. And as the human resistance pushed forward, the once unthinkable notion became a reality: humanity was not just surviving. They were conquering. Victory was no longer a distant dream, it was within their reach. And with every victory, the Naderans saw just how unstoppable humanity's unity truly was. As the war raged on, the once glorious Nadaran Empire found itself crumbling under the relentless pressure of humanity's unity. The battle for Sci-Fi had been a turning point, a declaration to the galaxy that humanity was no longer the weak, isolated species they had once been. Their victory over the Naderans had sent shockwaves through the enemy's ranks, igniting hope in the hearts of oppressed planets and stirring the resolve of the human alliance. But the Naderans, though weakening, were far from finished. The death of the Inferna and the loss of their most powerful weapon had humiliated them, but the High Command was determined to end this war on their terms. Commander Thraxus, still reeling from the previous setbacks, had made a grim decision. He would gather his remaining forces, rally the fractured empire, and prepare for one final, decisive confrontation that would decide the fate of the galaxy. "We cannot allow this resistance to continue," Thraxus muttered as he watched holographic displays of the human fleet's movements. "If we do not crush them now, we will lose everything. We must break them once and for all." Vyri, ever the strategist, nodded grimly. "The humans are resilient, but they are also overextended. Their fleets are stretched thin, and their morale, though high, is fragile. If we strike now, before they can consolidate their gains, we can overwhelm them. The remaining resistance is weak, divide them, and we will conquer." And so, the Naderans prepared for their last desperate attempt to reclaim their dominance. Thraxus amassed what remained of the Nadaran fleet, a vast armada that stretched across several star systems. The Nadarans' final weapon was not a ship or a device, it was a tactic, a calculated blitzkrieg to destabilize human defenses and fracture the alliance before it could fully recover. On the human side, Admiral Donovan knew the Nadarans would not let this war end without a fight. The intelligence they had gathered from infiltrators and spies indicated that the Nadarans were gathering their forces for one final push. The time had come for humanity to make their stand. The stakes were higher than ever. A single loss now could lead to their extinction. A single failure could undo everything they had worked for. In the heart of the human fleet's command center, Donovan's voice rang with determination. "This is it. The Nadarans are coming for us, and they're bringing everything they have. But they underestimate us. They underestimate our will to survive, our unity. We're going to show them that humanity's strength is not just in our weapons, but in our resolve." The human alliance, now forged from the fires of countless battles and built on the unbreakable bond of shared purpose, gathered for one final assault. The combined fleets of humans, former Nadaran defectors, and resistance groups would take the fight directly to Nadaran-controlled space. Their objective was clear: the heart of the Nadaran Empire. But even as they prepared for battle, the human fleet was split. Half would engage in a massive diversion, drawing the Nadaran forces away from their true objective. The other half would strike directly at the Nadaran homeworld, Narthal, to end the war once and for all. It was a dangerous plan, one that would rely on precision, timing, and an unwavering trust in the unity that had defined humanity's rise. If either part of the plan failed, it could mean the end of their resistance. As the human fleets advanced toward Narthal, the Nadaran forces fell for the trap. The diversionary assault, led by Captain Tylus and Admiral Donovan's second-in-command, General Erica Lang, was a resounding success. The Nadaran fleet split its forces, rushing to intercept the decoy fleet, leaving the path to Narthal open. The human assault on Narthal began with a series of surgical strikes on key Nadaran infrastructure. It wasn't just about destroying ships or weapon systems, it was about crippling the Nadaran ability to respond, cutting off their communications, and weakening their command structure. The humans knew that if they could disrupt the heart of the Natoran war effort, they would be able to cripple the Empire permanently. Yet the Natarans, despite their losses, were not without their own deadly defenses. As the human forces neared Narthel's surface, the planet's own planetary shield network activated, stronger than ever before. The Natarans, aware of the humans' approach, had prepared a final line of defense, the Leviathan-class war machine, a massive mobile fortress capable of devastating entire fleets. On the human side, a cold sense of resolve settled over Donovan as her fleet neared the planet's defenses. This was it, the moment where their fate would be decided. There would be no retreat, no second chances. If they succeeded, the galaxy would be free. If they failed, it would be the end of everything. Admiral Donovan's flagship, the Vanguard, moved into position, and the assault on Narthel began. The human fleets unleashed wave after wave of coordinated attacks, overwhelming the planet's outer defenses. The Nataran Leviathan-class war machines were formidable, but they were not invincible. The humans had studied every facet of Nataran technology and had learned how to counter it. As the battle for Narthel reached its climax, a piercing message echoed across the communication channels: "We are humanity. We are unity. We will not be broken." The final push began. The Nataran defenses faltered under the weight of the human assault. The Nataran fleet, divided and scattered, found itself unable to mount a coherent defense. Thraxus, watching from his command center on Narthel, realized too late that the human resolve had become a force stronger than any weapon. In one final, desperate act, the Nataran High Command launched their last-ditch offensive, a suicidal assault with all remaining warships targeting the human fleet. But it was too little, too late. The human forces, bolstered by their unbreakable unity and sheer will, fought back with everything they had. The battle for Narthel raged for hours, but as the last Nataran ship was destroyed and the final defenses of Narthel fell, the human fleet stood victorious. Admiral Donovan stood at the helm of the Vanguard, watching as the Nataran homeworld crumbled before them. The cost of the victory had been high, many had given their lives, but the future of the galaxy was secure. Humanity had done the impossible. They had defeated an empire that had thought them insignificant, showing the universe that their unity, their strength, could not be broken. And in that moment, the galaxy knew the truth: humanity was not just a species, they were a force that would shape the stars. The Nataran Empire had fallen, its once proud banners shattered and scattered across the stars. In the wake of the battle for Narthel, the galaxy was forever changed. Humanity, the underdogs who had once been seen as weak and insignificant, now stood as the most powerful force in the galaxy. The Natarans, broken and beaten, were no longer the imperial juggernaut they had once been. They were scattered, leaderless, and their empire had dissolved into chaos. Admiral Alara Donovan, standing in the war room aboard her flagship Vanguard, looked out at the stars. The war had ended, but there was no time for celebration. The destruction of the Nataran Empire had left a power vacuum, a vacuum that would not go unfilled. The galaxy was now up for grabs, and new alliances would need to be forged to ensure that peace, not tyranny, would rule the stars. "We've won the war," Donovan said to the council gathered around her. "But this is only the beginning of a new chapter. The Natarans are in disarray, but their former allies will not be. There are other factions, other empires, waiting for their chance. We can't afford to be complacent." Across the room, General Erica Lang, her right-hand officer and trusted friend, stepped forward. "We can't let our guard down, Alara. The destruction of the Natarans was only one part of the equation. The galaxy is filled with factions that will seek to fill the power void we've created. We need to be prepared to handle that." The human alliance had already begun to make strides in rebuilding. The liberated colonies, once under the cruel rule of the Natarans, had begun to recover. The human forces, working in cooperation with their allies, many of whom had once been enemies, started to offer assistance, bringing technology, supplies, and medical aid to war-torn planets. The new alliance, born of necessity and forged in the crucible of war, became the foundation for a brighter future. But this future was fragile. The humans had won their place as the dominant power in the galaxy, but with that power came responsibility to ensure that the cycle of conquest and war didn't repeat itself. They would need to establish order, promote peace, and, above all, protect the galaxy from descending into the chaos the Naderans had left behind. In the heart of the Nadaran capital city, now a charred ruin, a council was being convened. The last remnants of Nadaran leadership, those who had survived the collapse of the Empire, were planning their next moves. Their forces were shattered, their resources depleted, but they were not without ambition. They had lost the war, but they still held power. Vairi, once a high-ranking Nadaran commander, stood before the remains of the imperial throne. Her expression was cold, calculating. "The Nadarans have lost their place in the galaxy," she said, her voice steady. "But we will rebuild. The humans may have beaten us, but they cannot keep us down forever. There are still factions loyal to us, still resources at our disposal. If we unite them, we can rise again." Her words fell on the ears of several high-ranking officers, defectors, and disgruntled former Nadaran nobles who had lost everything in the war. They all knew the cost of defiance, how humanity had turned the tide of war, but Vairi was not afraid. She was a survivor. She had seen empires rise and fall, and she believed that the Nadarans could do it again. In the shadows of her new alliance, she began to quietly rebuild the Nadaran forces, gathering whatever loyalists remained and securing weapons from the wreckage of their former empire. She would not let the Nadarans fade into obscurity. Not yet. Back in the heart of human-controlled space, Admiral Donovan was faced with the monumental task of leading a new, galactic-scale reconstruction effort. She knew the road ahead would be long and fraught with challenges. Humanity's victory had been hard-earned, but the real battle would be in securing a future where the horrors of war would not be repeated. She turned to the newly formed Galactic Council, which had convened to discuss the path forward for the galaxy. The council was made up of representatives from the liberated colonies, various races and factions who had once been enemies, and, of course, humanity. "The Nadarans are gone," Donovan began, "but the galaxy remains divided. We are not here to impose our will on anyone, we are here to forge something better. A future built on cooperation, not conquest. We will rebuild, but we must remember the lessons we've learned." Captain Tylus, the Nadaran defector who had played such a crucial role in the victory, stepped forward. "Humanity's greatest strength isn't in your technology or your firepower. It's in your unity. The galaxy will look to you now, not just as the victors, but as the beacon of hope. The Nadarans were defeated because you stood together, no matter the cost. Don't let that strength slip away." Donovan nodded, taking in his words. "We will forge alliances, yes. But we will also ensure that the ideals that brought us together, the ones that allowed us to defeat the Nadarans, will guide us forward. We cannot allow ourselves to fall into the same traps of greed, power, and division that destroyed so many before us." The path ahead was not easy, and there were many factions who would challenge the new order. But humanity's resolve, the unity that had carried them through the darkest hours of war, remained their greatest weapon. And now, it would be their greatest shield as well. As the council deliberated, a silent message was being transmitted across the galaxy. The human forces, along with their allies, had begun to enforce peace throughout the galaxy. They were not conquerors, they were guardians. They understood the power of unity and the dangers of division. But in the shadows, as the galaxy began to rebuild, something else stirred. Vairi's efforts were not going unnoticed. Her secretive efforts to reunite the fractured Nadaran forces were slowly gaining traction, and the whispers of a new Nadaran rebellion began to spread through the dark corners of space. She had learned from her mistakes, and now, with a galaxy in flux, she was ready to make her move. As the sun set on Narthal, now a planet of ruins, Vairi stood on the precipice of a new era, one where the Nadarans would rise again. And this time, she promised herself, they would not be beaten so easily. The galaxy was at a crossroads. And humanity had to decide what kind of future it would build. Would it be a future of cooperation, of unity? Or would the lessons of the past be forgotten, leading to new cycles of war and destruction? The answers would come in time, but one thing was certain, humanity's influence in the galaxy was now undeniable, and their choices would shape the future of all life among the stars. The age of the Natoran Empire was over, but the age of humanity had just begun. The universe had begun to turn its eyes toward humanity. From the ashes of the Natoran Empire, a new order emerged, one that was built on the lessons of unity, sacrifice, and strength. But while the humans and their allies celebrated their hard-earned victories, the shadows still lingered in the vast reaches of space. The Natarans, though shattered, were not yet vanquished, and new threats loomed on the horizon. As the galaxy adjusted to this new power dynamic, it became clear that the peace humans fought for was a delicate one. Admiral Alara Donovan stood on the bridge of the Vanguard, looking out across the star-streaked abyss of space. The view was serene, yet she felt the weight of it all. The galaxy, once embroiled in the fires of war, was now a canvas for a new beginning. But peace, she knew, was never a guarantee. The galaxy was still fractured, and despite humanity's newfound role as a protector and a leader, there were forces, old and new, that sought to challenge their dominance. "The galaxy is watching us," General Lang said, stepping beside Donovan. "Our actions will set the course for everything that comes next. We can't afford to make mistakes." Donovan nodded solemnly. "We can't afford complacency. The Natarans are in disarray, but the remnants of their empire are still a threat. We've seen how quickly empires can fall, only to rise again from the ashes. We need to be ready." While humanity's victory had resulted in the fall of the Natarans, their struggle to consolidate power across a now wary galaxy had only just begun. But Donovan was resolute. She had seen how humanity had come together in the face of annihilation, and she believed, truly believed, that the bonds forged in the crucible of war were stronger than any empire or military force. Together, humanity and its allies could maintain peace. Together, they could build a new order, one not based on conquest, but on unity, on the lessons they had learned from the Natarans' downfall. In the heart of the human-controlled sectors, efforts were underway to establish a governing council. The Galactic Peace Accord, a union of the liberated planets and new allies, was beginning to take shape. It would be a new political system where no species or empire would dominate the others. A system that would prioritize diplomacy, cooperation, and mutual respect. But not all were ready to embrace this vision. Factions within the galaxy, both large and small, still eyed each other with suspicion. There were powerful interests who had risen from the ashes of the Nataran Empire, eager to carve out their own piece of power and wealth. The Natarans' former allies, their once subjugated planets, and several disgruntled species were beginning to form resistance cells. They believed the humans, despite their victories, were no different from the tyrants they had just overthrown. And in the dark corridors of the galaxy, Vairi, the former Nataran commander, had quietly begun her own rebellion. In secret, she rallied the surviving factions loyal to the Natarans and their cause, stitching together a fractured network of soldiers, spies, and mercenaries. The Natarans might have been defeated, but their spirit had not died. Vairi was determined to reclaim her people's glory, no matter the cost. On the outskirts of human-controlled space, Vairi convened a meeting of her closest allies, a quiet assembly of former Nataran generals, mercenary leaders, and rogue elements of the old empire. Their purpose was clear: the galaxy was ripe for another conquest, and they would be the ones to lead it. They would use humanity's unity against them, manipulating the fractured alliances of the galaxy to sow division, and ultimately to strike when the time was right. "We are the true inheritors of this galaxy," Vairi said, her voice cold and determined. "Humanity is weak. Their victory is nothing but the result of their desperation. They will never hold this power for long. We will rise again, and we will do so by exploiting their greatest strength." Vairi's plan was simple: divide and conquer. Humanity's alliance, while strong, was tenuous. There were too many different species, too many different interests. The cracks had already begun to show, and Vairi knew exactly where to strike. If she could pit humanity's allies against each other, she could weaken their unity, allowing her to tear down the new order and restore the Nataran Empire's dominance. But as Vairi plotted in the shadows, humanity remained vigilant. Admiral Donovan and her council knew the peace they sought to build would not be easy, and they were not naive enough to think the war was over. In response to the growing threat of the Natoran rebellion, the Galactic Council increased their efforts, strengthening the unity between the different species and creating a military force designed to defend the galaxy against any further invasions. They had learned from the Natarans' rise to power, and they would not repeat the same mistakes. Donovan, now a symbol of humanity's strength, was relentless in her pursuit of peace. But she was not blind to the challenges ahead. The galaxy was no longer just a collection of planets and species, it was a fragile web, one that could unravel at any moment. In the months that followed, the humans worked tirelessly to maintain order. They implemented trade agreements, diplomatic missions, and cultural exchanges, attempting to bridge the gap between the liberated colonies and their former captors. They fought to ensure that the lessons of the past, the horrors of empire and conquest, would never again take hold. Yet, despite all their efforts, the threat of war loomed large. Vyri's forces, though fractured and covert, began to strike from the shadows, destabilizing the human alliances with sabotage and subversion. Whispers of the Natarans' return began to circulate, feeding the paranoia and fear that had once made the galaxy ripe for tyranny. Admiral Donovan, sensing the rising tide of unrest, knew that the only way to secure a lasting peace was to confront this threat head-on. The galaxy's future depended on it. In a bold move, she ordered a series of covert operations to infiltrate and dismantle the Nataran rebellion before it could escalate into full-scale war. Her plan was risky, but if it succeeded, it would eliminate the threat and send a message to all those who might try to rise against the unity humanity had fought so hard to build. The final confrontation between humanity and the remnants of the Nataran Empire came swiftly. The human fleet, supported by their allies, moved to intercept Vyri's forces in a battle that would decide the fate of the galaxy. Vyri, ever the strategist, had prepared her forces well, but she underestimated the unity of humanity once again. In the heart of the conflict, as ships collided in the vastness of space, Admiral Donovan made her move. With precision and coordination, she and her fleet dismantled Vyri's forces, cutting through the rebellion with ruthless efficiency. As Vyri's flagship fell, her dream of a resurrected Nataran empire died with it. With the rebellion crushed, the galaxy stood at a crossroads. Humanity had secured its place in the stars, but the lessons of the past were never far behind. The future remained uncertain, but one thing was clear: the strength of unity would guide them through the darkest times. And as the stars shone brightly above them, humanity knew they had secured not just their survival, but a chance to shape the future of the galaxy, a future where peace, cooperation, and unity would reign supreme. Humanity had conquered the stars. But it was their unity that had truly conquered the universe.